over there from our friends at University Bookstore. And if you're joining us online, there's a link in the chat. Monica de la Torre is an assistant professor in the School of Transborder Studies at Arizona State University. De la Torre's interdisciplinary research and teaching practices bridge Chicana feminist theory, Latinx feminist media studies, radio and sound studies, and women's and gender studies. As a critical scholar and practitioner of digital media and radio, she analyzes both media, content, and production practices to push the analytic edge of scholarship, foregrounding modalities of difference such as gender, race, class, and citizenship. She is a former community radio producer and member of the Los Angeles-based radio collective Soul Rebel Radio. Gabriel Teodros is a musician, writer, and DJ from South Seattle who first made a mark with the group Assyrian Creole and reached an international audience with his critically acclaimed solo debut, Love Work. He has released 10 projects since and set stages on fire all over the map from the US to Canada, Mexico, Cuba, Ethiopia, and South Africa, often in combinations with workshops on creative writing, music, history, science fiction, and media literacy. Teodros currently hosts The Early Show on KEXP Seattle. Please join me in welcoming Monica de la Torre and Gabriel Teodros.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Mics.
Check
Hey,
1 2.
We have a professional check 1 2.
Should I beatbox and you rap?
You do it.
Just playing.
Hi everyone. Wow.
Yeah. So how's it going?
It's going good. Hi Gabriel. How are you?
Good. Is this your first book event, or have you done some before?
This is the first one that's like this, so it's really awesome. Yeah.
Hey, can you make some noise for that? I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I was diving into the book today. Feminista Frequencies, community building through radio in the Yakima Valley, is such an important piece of Northwest history, of radio history, of Chicana history. Before we really get into it, and you talk about this in the book, I was wondering if you could talk about your roots in radio.
Of course.
And what Soul Rebel Radio is.
Soul Rebel Radio. Shout out to Soul Rebel Radio. When I graduated from my undergraduate degree at UC Davis, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And I, took the LSAT and applied to law school and then thought, that seems boring. So I decided not to do that and to move back home with my parents. And I started working at a nonprofit, and I really missed school. And so I went back to a master's program in Chicana and Chicano studies at Cal State Northridge. And it was there that I was at a conference, and I met a group of people that looked like me, sounded like me, were from the same area of me where I grew up, who were doing a radio show called Soul Rebel Radio. And I attended that workshop, and at the end of it, they said, we're always looking for volunteers. And so I lit up, my eyes got big, and I was like, I've always wanted to be on the radio, right? I grew up listening to the radio, driving with my mom to school, and it's just something that's really deep in my own daily practice. And so when this opportunity came, they said, you don't need to have any radio experience. You could just, we'll teach each other. And I really love that because I had tried to be on the radio as an undergrad at KDVS, which is a really pretty famous college radio station. And when I walked into that radio station, I didn't feel like me. It didn't feel like the folks there, really wanted to teach and be generous with how to make radio. So I was really turned off by that and thought, well, that's never going to be a dream that I can accomplish. And so to get then this group of people that were like, no, we'll teach each other, I was like, okay, this sounds like my group of people. We don't know what we're doing, but we're just going to try.
I love that. What kind of programming did you do, and what kind of stuff did you produce?
So it was a monthly program. So as someone that does radio every day, it's really exhausting. But to have a once a month, it was a 1 hour show that we really just threw all of our hearts and energies into. We picked a topic every month that related to whatever we wanted. We were young people, the youth, and the youth, and we just picked a topic. We would get together every 6 months or a year, and we would just throw up a list of topics. So everything from education to war to the year 1968 to young women's issues. So it was kind of random sometimes, but we did everything from skits to music to just a variety of interviews with people from the community. So it was a kind of a mix of different things. And but KPFK in LA gave us an hour a month, and on the first Friday of the month, and so we did everything we could with that 1 hour.
That's fire. How in your journey, how did you get from Soul Rebel Radio to attending university up here in Seattle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So while I was doing the radio stuff, I was doing my master's at the same time, and really became just falling more deeply in love with my culture and the communities that I grew up with: immigrant, Mexican American, Chicana, Latinx, just different types of folks that I really wanted to tell our histories, tell our stories. In the United States, Mexican Americans, unfortunately, are typically painted only one or two very negative ways. And I know that my background is a lot more richer, and we have a place here in the U.S., and we have a deep contribution to the different cultures of the U.S. And so when I started learning more about Chicana and Chicano history, and learning about things like theater and arts, and I've always really been a lover of arts and culture. And so when I applied to graduate schools, I applied to 3, and I got into 1. I got into the University of Washington in Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies. Shout out to GWSS, and to my advisor, Michelle, who's here tonight.
Oh, hi, Michelle. This is bright light. I can't see anybody.
But when I moved up here, and I was just so excited to just start to study more about culture, and I thought I was going to write my dissertation on theater. But then Michelle was like, "Have you heard of this radio station called Radio Cadena, KDNA?" And I said, "No, what is that?" She's like, "Oh, it's a Spanish language station here. It was started by Chicanos." And I was like, "What? I've never heard of that. How? I'm in radio. How is this even possible?" And so, thanks to her and to the department, and to, being in a place that really encouraged me to kind of put all these things together and say, yeah, this is definitely, a story worth pursuing, and it's a history that needs to be told. And it just all sort of fell into place, and here we are.
I love it. I love it so much. Man, shout out to Michelle. Thank you for making that suggestion so this book can be written.
Yeah.
I had a friend where she was studying who said, Monica's great, and she's part of Soul Rebel Radio, and then I went and looked at her app, and it wasn't there. And so then I called her, and I was like, "You need to tell the department about this. This is," and it was that radio experience that.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, so Michelle really did. That was something, doing the radio stuff was my fun activity, right? It wasn't something that I really thought was an area worth studying, right? I was like, oh, I didn't, again, because I didn't know the history, I didn't think that there was anything to study, right? So that really just then just connected all the dots.
Yeah. I wanted to highlight your method of research and the way you talk about it in this book. I love. You talk about being an archivist activist, archivista. Can you please talk about that and what that means to you, and even your methodology of
Yeah.
research?
Yeah. So I think that, again, being in a place, being in a department, being, in graduate school in a place that was really open to us thinking about research in not just a way that is about taking from people in the community, but about building with, right? And so, again, in that same program, I was part of a group called Women Who Rock. That is a project, again, associated with my wonderful advisor, Michelle, and so many others. It's where we met. It was a way for us to think about how do we disrupt the stories in the archive that tend to focus on primarily men and mostly white men as the main subjects of history, right? And so what archivista, this archivista way of doing research or praxis, a fancy way, we have to throw in the fancy academic word sometimes, fancy way of saying, doing something with, a goal behind it, a goal that is, again, about bringing to light the stories of marginalized communities, but also doing it in a way that is giving back, but then also giving recognition too, right? That, again, the book has my name on the title, but it is definitely, and continues to be a group effort, right? Collective effort. But it really just was a way to think about research in a collective manner.
Yeah, and in the epilogue, you talk a lot about your relationship with Rosa. Can you talk about more about that relationship? Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first started to do the project on KDNA, the first person I met, her name, actually, we have some pictures. So
Nice.
we get to. Some of the pictures of the people. So Rosa
that's the
is the
tower they built, right?
This is the radio transmitter shack on top of Atanum Ridge in the Yakima Valley. So those of you not familiar with Yakima, it is east of Seattle, and it's an agricultural area, right? You could see in this picture the fields in the background. So Rosa's sitting from the right. She's sitting on the truck, on the flatbed truck with the kind of the black and white checkered shirt. So Rosa Ramon was just, I call her my radio fairy godmother, because if it wasn't for her, a lot of this work would still be, not now in a book. She was the first station manager of Radio Cadena. So the station manager is, basically the person that's in charge, really kind of the boss in a lot of ways. But it was cool to have a woman be in charge of the radio station, because she was just very thorough, and one of the first things she bought was a camera with her first paycheck. And so she took a lot of the early photographs, but I met her and I interviewed her in 2012. And she just, was really generous with her story, and knowing that this was something that needed to be documented more. Even though she had a lot of the early pictures, they were living in her basement, right? And so how do we then bring this really important history of a radio station that was made for, by, and about farm workers? How do we conserve this history? So she was just really instrumental, and this is her on the left here inside of the transmitter shack with some of the engineers that helped build the transmitter shack. So, we met and we just clicked from the beginning. My background in radio, I think, really intrigued her, and one of the one thing that I heard a lot in approaching people about the research was that, they were a little wary of me being a feminist researcher, but when they saw I had radio background, that they were like, okay, cool, we will talk to you, right? So that was always my way of connecting more deeply to the folks that I got to talk to. But Rosa was just really amazing in helping me think about how do we talk about the station in a way that celebrates the collective and isn't just about one person or one individual, right? But that the history is very much one that's embedded with all of the people that were a part of the station.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. I got so many ideas at once, right? One thing that struck me was there was a story in the book about her going to a conference with other radio stations, and she was the only woman who was a manager of a radio station in the whole country at the time, which says a lot. I work in radio now. I can tell you that it's rare right now, so the story is just so inspiring. Also the fact that they built this, right? They built it from the ground up, by the people, for the people, intentionally to be the voice of the farm worker, essentially, it's so powerful. I guess this is kind of a personal question, but, I grew up here in Seattle. I feel like there is a huge divide between the city, and the eastern part of the state, right? And it was telling to me, when El Centro de la Raza was mentioned in here, because I also grew up on Beacon Hill, going to poetry classes and playing basketball at El Centro. And kind of my only, like growing up, my only like point of reference to farm workers in Washington State came through the murals inside the hallways at El Centro, you know, without even really knowing the entire like deep history behind it. I was wondering for you, what was your connection to farm worker communities, maybe near the area where you grew up?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, which is, you know, a pretty urban place. I grew up in a city called Montebello, which is, you know, east of downtown LA. It's not one of the more well-known areas of LA. It's not the LA that most people think about, right? But for me, my connection, you know, to farm workers is just having my grandparents be, both of my grandfathers were part of the Bracero program, which was, you know, a farm worker, guest worker program that started in the 1940s, where, you know, because of World War II, we needed people to go out into the fields and pick the crops, right? So they wouldn't go to waste. And so they started this guest worker program with mostly Mexican men. And again, the term bracero means arm, but it specifically refers to just, you know, what they were needed and wanted for, right? So their labor, their arms. And so both of my grandfathers, you know, first started traveling from Mexico, Zacatecas, shout out to Zacatecas. We, you know, they that was their first like encounter to the US, that, you know, that back and forth migrant, you know, coming to work and then returning home. And so for me, just knowing that, having that background, having, you know, coming from an immigrant background, you know, we know a lot of farm workers are both immigrant but also migrant, and, you know, that there's diversity within that experience. But it was important for me to shed light on a group of people that I think, you know, don't get enough, you know, recognition or support or money. You know, the labor is still very much one that's a backbreaking, and that we still have conditions that are unfair and unjust for farm workers. And so for me to know that there was a resource for this community that was started to, you know, tell farm workers about their rights, to tell farm workers about services they could access, right? Social services, educational services. A lot of migrant farm workers, you know, travel in families and work in families. And so the fact that the radio station was able to provide those services through the airwaves was just something for me that spoke to just my own. I can imagine my grandfathers listening to the radio, and, you know, how cool it would have been for them back then to, you know, be able to have more programming for them.
That's right. It's such a powerful thing to hear your story reflected in the media, you know, in any whatever form of media it is, you know. Another thing that inspired me so much about their story was it was radio, but it was also like a community center, right? Like they had the gatherings every Sunday.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So the radio station, let's see, this was the first radio station, the first building, the actual like studios. So Granger is a small farm worker community, right? It's a very rural town. Still to this day, when I, you know, would go to the station and visit, it was just so different from Seattle, right? It's small, you know, farm workers. You see the fields all around. This building was called the Academy. It was a hotel in the early part of the 1900s because it was the stop between Spokane and Seattle. The middle point was Granger. And so that was a place that people would stop and stay the night. It later, after it shut down as a hotel, it became a church, a Seventh-day Adventist church, until finally another group took over the building, a social services group for farm workers called Northwest Rural Opportunities. And they were part of starting the station. They got a lease for the building for $1 from another organization. So you see some of the inter-organizational help that the radio station was able to build from, right? So this building then became the radio station studios. They, you know, made the different offices into recording studios and radio studios, and they also had the organization, the social service organization there. So when people came to the radio station looking for, social services, and they would see Radio Cadena and they would recognize it. And so one of the stories that, I would hear a lot when I would talk to people about the station was that the first thing people would do, especially the farm workers Mexican community, was instead of calling 911, they would always call the station for information, right? If there was something going on, that was their number, right? On their refrigerator was Radio Cadena. And so again,
that says so much.
Yeah,
I just need to pause right there, because I feel like our whole community is terrified to call 911 for good reason.
Yeah.
To have someone else that's safe that you can call. Wow.
I know, right? Yeah, that's a great function of radio.
I just needed to pause there, but go ahead.
No, it's great. It's a great point. And so the station, again, then became a place where people would come and they would have events at the station. On Sundays, they would have tardeadas or parties, fundraisers, right? Because a lot of the money that was needed to run the station came from the actual listeners. And so it just really became, because of, I think, again, the space, the geography, it really became a hub for people to just go and, again, get advice, ask questions in a place that they knew was going to be welcoming.
So beautiful. I guess another huge thing we should talk about is the context, right?
Yeah.
In which the radio station was founded, because it was in the middle of the farm workers movement. They were inspired by Cesar Chavez. Can you talk a little bit about that? What else was going on at that time?
Yeah, so again, the station first went on air in 1979. They started in around 1975 getting together and thinking about how are we going to create media for the farm worker community. So if you think about, the time period, the 70s were coming towards, kind of the downflow of the civil rights movement, not the end, because movements continue even when they're not super active. But the station really was started by people that were influenced by the civil rights movement, by knowing that there are certain things that the government should provide for us as, citizens, right? And so they really went to, to the radio station with the idea that it was their right? It's our right as people in this country to be able to have access to the airwaves, to communicate, to share our culture, music, any other programming, right? It was also around the time of the women's movement, right, of women's activism. And so I in the book, say that all of these things came together at the radio station because, one, the people were reflected, right? The fact that women were welcome just as much as men. They welcomed children, right? They had a children's program that's still on the air to this day in the mornings called El Jardín de los Niños, children's or kindergarten. And so I think they just took the environment they were in, the context. Cesar Chavez, one of the leaders of the United Farm Worker Movement, actually visited the station in the 80s and was inspired to start his own station. And we still have that Radio Campesina network on air to this day. And so it really did become a place that you had the different aspects of the Mexican community on air, right? Meaning that it wasn't just programming that was music or, it was only men on the air. It was, again, programming that ranged from health programs to music to a women's show, a cooking show. They had mass on Sundays. So they really tried to accommodate and think about the people that they were trying to, air the content to.
Yeah, so beautiful. And then the title, Feminista Frequencies. I know this is more than a book because I read parts of the book. I still need to finish it. But I know that there's a website as well.
Yes.
And I know it's an ongoing archival project. Can you talk about that too?
Yes. So Feminista Frequencies, it's a concept that I really played with in the book in the sense of I wanted to, again, highlight the women, highlight the fact that bringing different content to the airwaves takes community effort. Frequencies travel, frequencies, once they're out in the air, remain. They keep vibrating until space. And so I just really like this idea of encapsulating how these frequencies started in one place, but then reverberated throughout the country and are still, heard today. And so for me, the idea of not just having this be a book, but also it didn't make sense to me to have all these images and not show them, not showcase them. They're in the book, obviously, and I'm so grateful the University of Washington Press, just did such an amazing job with putting the book together and the images that are in there. But I also want this to be accessible to a wide audience, right? I really want to hope that, people that read the book can go to the website and see these amazing images. I'm working on a podcast that, will give you the actual sound, right? There's just something really unique about learning through listening. And so I really hope that this is just a tool that's used for education, for archiving, right? For documenting, for showing that. I just love the pictures of the women in front of the reel to reel and editing. The actual editing where you had to cut the tape in half and then
Did you ever have to cut tape?
I didn't, no.
I never had to cut tape either.
I just use I just got a friend's copy of Adobe and
Yeah. Do you know who Nastyness is?
Who?
Nastyness.
No.
Nastyness is a hip hop DJ in Seattle, and he was the first hip hop DJ west of the Rockies.
Oh.
And it was here in Seattle, Filipino brother.
that's dope.
He did a radio show called Rap Attacks on K-Fox. I interviewed Nastyness like last year we were doing a series on the Filipino influence on hip hop culture. He was talking about making radio edits of like NWA songs to play on the radio. So for people that are not in radio, like you have to like bleep out all the expletives, the bad words, the FCC will find you. He would have to physically cut the tape on each word.
Wow.
And then tape it together. And I asked him how long. He was like, man, sometimes it would take 8 hours a song, but just had to do it. NWA had to be heard.
Has to be heard. Cuss words or not.
Anyways, whenever I see people editing on reel to reel, I am so impressed. Like that is hard.
That is a skill.
That is
hard. Just something that takes so much talent and creativity. And that's another aspect that I really wanted to bring to focus in the book was that, we have a legacy of women, of Mexican, of Chicana, that were creative on their airwaves, right? That, for me, when I, started to learn how to produce radio, I would spend hours just with the headphones. That's when I see with the headphones and at my computer, right? But just like sitting there and like 3 a.m, just like, what time is that? I don't care. Like editing and just really being, just so in love and so inspired to just be able to like make something, out of that came out of my brain, right? Like that was just not a concept that I grew up with as a young, girl. I was not taught that, I have creative capacity. I was taught, you have one job maybe, and that's get married and have kids, or, settle down. And to me, that just was like, oh, well, that sounds kind of boring. So let's make things like radio and media. And so, I just really love to see that. When I hear, public radio is, as you maybe hear, being on public radio, it's for white nerds, white dudes. It's not, and it's never been. It's just that our histories don't get the platforms that they deserve.
That's right. We have to tell them. If we don't, then it gets erased, or somebody tells it for you and they get it wrong. So thank you for telling this story. I'm so happy to hear you talking about producing a podcast in relationship to this book. Can I ask what else you got, like other creative projects? I know this is a major thing that you just completed, but I'm just curious if you're thinking about
we'll
future
see.
Things,
We'll see. I'm really hoping, I think seeing this to completion just proved to me that, that this is something that I love doing, that I love writing, that I love being creative. And so I'm really hoping to be able to just continue, taking history and telling it in a creative, fun way, but then also maybe playing with maybe creative writing or, just some other things maybe. I don't know. We'll see. I'm really hoping that I really miss producing media. So I'm hoping once I finish the podcast that it'll just re-inspire me and reignite that fire of production.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear the podcast. We have an audience question actually.
Awesome.
And I was told there's a code you can
A QR code.
a QR
scan
code
if
you can scan if you want to ask questions, and I'll get it on this device. I don't know where that code is. I hope, did they tell y'all?
Oh, there it is. There's
There
the
we
QR
go.
code.
Yeah, so that's where you go on your phone to ask us questions. Look, I work in radio. I don't know about QR codes. All right. So the question is, how has your relationship developed with the Yakima farm workers from your first moment till now?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Well, I won't take any credit that isn't deserved. So I, haven't been working with current farm workers. I've mostly worked with the people that were involved in the early days of radio. But I can say that, the radio station continues to be an important part of the community. So going to the radio station, seeing that it was still vibrant, that building is no longer the building. It's actually a brand new, beautiful center that was, I think finished in like the mid 2000s, but it's pretty brand new, and it's continues to be an important hub. But it just really made me think about and appreciate more just, again, the labor that goes into the food we eat every day. I didn't grow up in this region, so knowing that just 2 hours across the mountains, there's just this vast place where all of our apples and hops and potatoes and beets and just all these, all this agriculture that is picked by farm worker hands is there, and that they still need the station, right? That the need is unfortunately still there. I wish the need was just for fun things and music, but there's still a lot of going on, and with what just happened with the pandemic too, that it was just such an important tool for farm workers to learn, and for everybody in the community to learn what was going on.
I'm kind of curious. Is there with the people that you built with really deeply in the research and in writing this book, is there a connection with them and that generation to the folks who are currently running the radio station right now?
There is still, there's still a lot of folks that were involved early on that are still there. One of the second station manager that I write about, Ricardo Garcia, still is very much a presence at the station. He goes and he gives tours, and I think once you're part of the station, you always are. But there definitely still is a legacy for sure.
We got so many questions coming in now.
Oh my goodness.
I said so many, it's like 3, but
Don't say that.
so many questions.
So many.
Keep them coming. I like this one. What was your wow moment while writing the book?
My wow moment. I think that came really early on when, for a long time, I really wanted to find a radio program. I hadn't listened to the early shows, right, that I was hearing about and learning about. I really wanted a copy of the show Mujer, Woman. It was the show focused on and for women, produced by women. And I was just, was doing anything and everything to get a copy of it. And I, one day, got to my laptop and I saw an email from Rosa, and she had found, not that show, but she had found an interview that a lot of the women did together for a presentation that they put together this radio clip, a radio piece. And so she found that and she sent that to me. And to hear the women talking about their experiences on the radio, I start one of the chapters with one of the quotes from, can we get the slideshow back on, please?
I read this part in the book too. I know you talked about this in the book.
So the woman on the left, Celia, she talks about in that piece, she's saying how when she did the news for one of the first times, she was really, really nervous, but that she saw the women, outside, Rosa and Estela, cheering her on, and that made her feel really good. And so that just kept her going. She had a little girl who was 5, and that she was proud that her daughter could hear on the radio. And so, those are the moments for me that just, when I heard her say that, I had been thinking, making radio did something to me, right? It changed me. It made me more open, more creative, more, it grounded me in a way, right? And so to hear them kind of say the same thing, that they loved doing it, that they were inspired, that having them break down the actual tasks of, writing the news and editing, it just, all of that confirmed to me that what I experienced was, similar to what they experienced, and that just being able to do radio did that to us, even though they did it in the 70s and I was, doing the radio stuff in the 2000s, that time gap really didn't matter at the end of the day. That
The openness, the skill sharing, the intention of getting more women to tell their stories and to have these skills, right?
Right. And just to have your voice on the radio, right? Like to hear, a lot of these women, just the vocal texture, the accent, all of that just really made me go, wow, no, this is something. Yeah. I think I'm onto something.
You are. You did that. Let's see. I have to scan on here to read the whole thing. It said, did you find that different generations had different relationships with the station? If so, how were they different, or how did they change over the years?
So I think when I talk to folks about the station, I think the older group that first started, I think we're really into thinking about the diversity, right? The diversity of our experiences and really putting that on the programming, right? What I heard now in terms of the relationship of younger generations is that they do want things to be shaken up a little bit, that there is some craving for newness. I didn't write so much about the current time in the book, but I think for the most part, I still did hear a lot of people that grew up with the station that started listening to the children's show, for example, and that now are adults or, have even gone to college. So I think it evolves, but I think for the most part, people have just identified the station as just, again, a cultural center, a community center, a space to come together. And I think that has not changed. I think that's remained consistent, that whenever I meet someone from the Yakima Valley, they're like, oh yeah, Radio KDNA or Cadena, they always will recognize it. So I think even though maybe the relationship isn't the same as it was for the people that, started the station, I think there's still very much an identification and a sense of pride for the station.
Yeah, that's awesome. One person just left a comment, said, no question, but thank you for paving the way for many of us first generation Latinas in academia. So admirable.
Thank you.
And I am pressing
I'll pay you later.
I am pressing all the wrong buttons here.
Can I ask you a question?
You can ask me a question. There's still more questions for you.
I do want to say that, I'm just so excited to be here with Gabriel. Besides being an amazing artist and musician, he's also a writer. So I will, just say that if you're interested in sci-fi, you have a short story in this collection called Octavia's Brood. But you're also a DJ. You're also on the radio now. So I just want to get your just thoughts about what it's like to be on the radio today. You do a show that I think really brings a diverse audience, but also diverse music and embraces that, right? So I would just want to know what that's like for you.
Yeah, it's a joy. Like you, radio was a big part of me growing up. Everything from what you described, like driving around with my mom and listening to the radio. I used to have a dual cassette deck at home, and not a lot of money, but a huge interest in hip hop music particularly. So I used to dub and make pause cassettes of songs that I heard on the radio. And I did that so much, and I started collecting little tapes. I started not eating school lunch because school lunch cost $1.25. And I realized that if I collected $1.25 every day and didn't tell my mom, that at the end of the week I could buy a new tape. So I was making pause tapes as a youngster. By the time I hit 9th grade and went to Garfield High School, I had my first little mixtape, and I guess you would call it a playlist now, but it was just a pause tape. And so just really influenced by my love for hip hop, and hip hop music as a whole saved my life, right? Hearing these voices to let me know I wasn't alone and that I wasn't crazy going through the things that I was going through. It absolutely saved my life, and in everything that I do, actually, because I'm a musician before I'm any of this, right? Secondly, a DJ. I guess I'm also like dabble in writing. All of it is to give the feeling back to younger people that hip hop always gave to me, right? That you're not alone. And yeah, that just continues with my work on the radio, right? I have a unending like hunger for new sounds, for new music, for new voices, for stories that aren't being heard anywhere else. I also grew up in the south end of Seattle. My family's from Ethiopia. And the south end is such a huge part of like what I think of when I think of just the way I think of the world, right? Because if you're from the south end and if you've been there for like 20, 30 years, like it's like I grew up in a Mexican neighborhood. I also grew up in a Filipino neighborhood and a Japanese neighborhood and an Ethiopian neighborhood and a black neighborhood and a native neighborhood.
And you're talking about Seattle.
And I'm talking about the same one neighborhood. You know what I mean? And when you grow up in that environment, like and the people that you love and the people that are right next door to you and the people that you grow up with and the people that have, influenced different parts of your being, like as important as it was for me to hear an Ethiopian hip hop artist, and by the way, I'm the first Ethiopian rapper that I heard growing up.
Woo, represent.
I'm not saying I'm the first though. I'm just saying I'm the first that I heard, right? Yeah. It becomes so much more important, and it's almost like as exciting as that first time I heard another like East African voice when I hear about this radio station. You know what I mean? Because that's like, I wish all the sisters that I grew up with in the same neighborhood had known about this. Maybe they were tuned in and they didn't tell me about it because I didn't speak Spanish. I don't know. But I'm just I'm just saying. So anyways, there's a long way to answer your question. When it comes to the music that I'm selecting on the radio, it's always about the South End for me, even if I don't say it. You know what I mean? Like I still want to reflect all the communities that help shape me. It's just that those communities that shape me are a lot, and they're not the dominant culture, and they're not the Seattle that you see or hear on the regular. They're not the Seattle that usually get these kind of platforms ever.
Right.
You know what I mean? And those are always the stories that I want to bring to the light,
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I feel like that's similar to, that's what fueled me to write this book, right? When those days where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
This is hard. I just, turned to, like my family and my friends, and everyone was like, no, like people deserve to know about us. Like people deserve to, we're not niche. We're not, we're not going anywhere. So you're either going to learn about us or, continue to believe, one narrative about, a diverse group of people. And that goes for any type of community, right? That for the most part, we don't get these diverse stories. When I first got admitted to the University of Washington, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to grunge land. Like, I didn't think that there was such a vibrant, communities here of people of color, of Black folk, of Indigenous folks, of just everywhere. And that's the case everywhere, right? And I think it's how do we start to understand more of that diversity, and that's what part of the work that radio does. So.
Yeah, and it's part of like placemaking, right? Because we're also talking about largely like migrant communities, whether it's communities that have chosen to migrate, communities that were forced to migrate, right? Because of war or because of famine or just like economic reasons. It's all valid. Whether you're just being displaced, we are all communities that have been pushed, to this place. And that's a very traumatizing experience, I think, for families and communities to go through. And art and storytelling, I think, is like one of the ways that we heal that trauma. It's the way we connect, and things like this, right? Like building a radio station is a way to help build home in a place where everything around you says you don't belong here, right? Like you're here for this one purpose to serve us, but we don't really want you here, right? Like you talked about that in here.
They would throw parties for the farm workers at the end of the growing season, like
go back to Texas, y'all.
Thanks.
Like for real, like that's what they did. That's wild.
I know. Like come back next year.
Yeah,
we'll still pay you the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm not sure how we're doing on time. I know there's 2 more audience questions. Can I get through these?
2 more pictures.
Is that a thumbs up, I hope? Okay, cool. Let's see. Okay, this person said, what has been the most unexpected thing you've encountered on the job? I don't know. Which job do you mean? Like as a writer, as a DJ?
Professor, as a
Professor?
all of it. Maybe of the writing of the book, I can say that
Okay.
the most. What was it? The most.
What the most unexpected thing you've encountered?
I think one of the hardest things is I did have somebody not want to talk to me, and that was unexpected and really sad. And I won't say who, but it was really. It just made me think a lot about, just because I want to talk to somebody doesn't mean they want to talk to me. But that I also had to respect that, right? That that there's just, a time and a place for people to share their stories. And that's not sometimes, for me to say when and where, right? So that was unexpected. I guess another unexpected thing was just all the connections to, again, to everything that I had studied, I had lived, and just the people that I continue to meet and are connected to Radio Cadena. I just did an interview with KUOW, and the producer was like, "Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm from the Yakima Valley, and I didn't know some of this history." And it's just, again, reaffirming to me that even people that grew up in that region still have a lot. We all have a lot to learn about that place. Yeah.
I know. I gotta say the part in there about El Centro really got me, because I'm not giving away too much of the book, but you talk about there was a Spanish language station here in Seattle that was not supportive at all of the occupation of the building of El Centro de la Raza, and the only radio support they got was from Yakima Valley.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm
Exactly.
like, wow,
Yeah.
this center in my neighborhood that helped better my life in so many ways was supported by this story that I didn't know anything about.
For sure. Yeah, they knew each other, right? One of so El Centro de la Raza, for those of you that don't know, was a former school, right? In Beacon Hill.
It was an abandoned building.
Right.
An old school building.
Yeah, and so a group of activists, both Chicano and Black and Filipino, I believe.
And Native.
Native and indigenous all got together, and they took over the school and said, we need and want to use the space, right?
Yeah. It's what they did is legal, actually, and there's a history of these kind of building occupations in Seattle, right? This is how the communities achieved a Daybreak Star. It's how they attempted to get the Northwest African American Museum, which got co-opted, but that's a longer story, and El Centro. And the way you don't break the law is if it's an abandoned building and you don't break a lock to get in, you can just go up in there. So when there was, I can't remember if it was a janitor or what it was. Like somebody opened the door and everybody was just waiting, and then they just bum rushed the building and started taking care of it.
Yep.
Oh, look at that! And through time, they gained ownership of the building. Now El Centro is a place that, as I was growing up, it had a food bank. Provided housing. It still provides low-income housing. They had a place that was a parking lot for many years. It was the basketball court that I grew up playing basketball on. It's now two large, affordable housing units on Beacon Hill, right above the light rail station. There's so much. There's a school there. There's but anyways, El Centro is an important part of my Seattle existence.
Right. And so when they were taking over the building, there was one Spanish language music radio program that the activists approached and said, could we air, information about El Centro, and the DJ said no. He was, not into the political aspect of anything, but he refused. And so then again, who came through was Radio Cadena, and again they were, because of the the organizing community being well connected in the Pacific Northwest at that time. They were able to find support both in El Centro and,
What are ways, and maybe this is not a question you can answer, but I'm curious. It's something I always think about, right? What are ways that you think we could collectively, right, as a larger community, do to kind of build those bridges between folks in the city and folks who work on the farms?
That's a great question. I think just first of all, just making ourselves aware and knowledgeable about both the existence, right? I don't think, again, we think about, we eat every day, and it
Yeah.
has to come from somewhere.
Right.
And so I think just educating ourselves about those communities, about what they experience, about what they get paid, about all of their challenges, and advocating, right? Starting with doing simple things like. I know boycotts are, things that we think of, again, of like the 60s or civil rights, but boycotts, not buying certain products, maybe it's just you think, oh, it's just me, it doesn't affect, but, it's like one drop is what creates the ripple effect, right? So I think it's, for us to listen and to care about one another and our well-being. And I think now more than ever, we have to be cognizant of the fact that who's going to take care of us is each other, right?
That's it.
And so I really hope that we continue to care for each other.
Absolutely. So there's a question and there's a comment here. You want the question or the comment?
Either one.
All right. I feel like you spoke to this a little bit, but I'll just ask it again. In the early days of the station, how did oh no, you didn't actually. No, I didn't ask this. My bad. In the early days of the station, how did the community receive the young Chicana radio producers?
So I write a bit in the book because this was obviously a painful topic for the women to talk about, right? That they did face machismo and hate and slut shaming and being told like, what are you doing? You're a young single woman. What are you running around with a group of men for? I think that for a lot of the older folks that were more conservative, it was shocking, right? To have women's voices on the radio, right? That's not something, or only a certain woman would be on the radio, right? And especially for, for Mexicanas, for Latinas to speak up, to be vocal, to have an opinion, to have, something to say, all of that was sometimes met with challenges. Rosa, said that, group of men tried to get her fired, and they would go and walk into the station and, they'd ask to speak to the manager, and she'd be like, yes, hi. No, can I speak to the manager? Yeah, it's me. No, not really. Can I speak to the manager, right? And so just all those, moments of, I don't want to say microaggressions even, they're just, I think a denial of what's clearly, the reality of the situation. If someone's telling you, I'm the station manager, what about them makes you not believe it? That's right. And again, I think it was, because it was a young woman. But then we do have the flip side of it where they were encouraged, right? That they found joy in it, found pleasure in creating media. And so I think that there was, both, but thankfully I think they were able to stick it out even in the face of that. A young woman shouldn't be on the radio type of thing. But
yeah, man, glad they did.
Yeah, me too.
All right, this last one is a comment, but I'm sure you can speak to it too. They said, we get told over and over again that representation matters and the importance of representation, but unfortunately you'll have Disney release Coco and people give them so much praise for being so brave for telling a diverse story. How does it help the Mexican children, the Chicana community, if they don't get the chance to tell those stories themselves?
Absolutely. I think that's such an important part. Yes. When we talk about representation, we usually talk about just, seeing or hearing ourselves. But as I talk about in the book, I think it's as important, if not more important, to see ourselves behind the camera, behind the microphone. I think that to just get, given or being told you only belong in this place of media making is not something we want to encourage, right? And so I hope that, again, when people when they read this book, hopefully, and learn from it, that they see that when a group of people wanted to get together and learn how to make something and create something, and it doesn't have to just be radio, it can be any form of creation, right? That it really is about, it'd be nice to have a lot of money to do it, but sometimes that just doesn't come, and Disney doesn't come knocking at your door. So we have to really make our own media, make our own radio, make our own movies, and support when we do, right? And know that one movie, one radio show, one station isn't going to fix the problem, right? It's part of the solution, but there needs to be a radical shift in the way that we, do things, and that's, that's a slow change is slow sometimes. So
Yeah, it is. It is, but I often think that, like, I feel like we are constantly like in a war of stories, whether we know it or not, right? Like the stories that people tell about us a lot of times can be attacks, especially when they're told by a dominant system, and those stories just aren't even true. They could be a stereotype, right? So it's like telling your own story is like ammunition in that fight. You know what I mean?
I love that.
Yeah.
War of stories. I like that.
Yeah. So this is for real. This got to be the last question, y'all. I think we're out of time. Why was radio with other people without experience such a welcoming experience? How would this project have been different, or would it have even existed if you hadn't had that communal learning experience?
I don't think it would have existed. It was welcoming. It was encouraging, because as somebody that didn't have a background in it, again, to go back to what I said earlier, when I went to my college radio station, we had to volunteer, and we had to volunteer 60 hours, or I don't know how many hours, before we even got to like touch a microphone or, do any of that. And to me, that just felt, it was very much about gatekeeping. Who I heard on that radio station, again, wasn't anybody that sounded like me. So then to get, a group of people that said, no, come on, you don't know how to do it. It's okay. You'll figure it out. You'll learn what you want to learn, right? There wasn't an expectation that, and even within our group, right, there wasn't, most of the producers were men. It was, and so it was interesting for me to basically just learn by sitting there and watching. But again, I wanted to do it. I wanted to learn, and there was never a no, right? There was maybe some pushback sometimes, or some, just creative differences. But for the most part, it was just what I needed to with my lack of self-confidence and not feeling like I, could do something like that, to have a group of people that was like, well, I used to not be able to do it, and now I can, really was encouraging. Yeah.
Monica, thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
For
Gabriel.
your time, for your stories, for writing this book.
Thank you.
Feminista Frequencies. Can y'all please make some noise?
Thank you. Thank you.
And you're going to be signing some books, yeah?
Yes, there's books for sale.
Yeah. Shout out to University Bookstore. Thank y'all for selling some books.
Thank you.
Thank y'all for being here.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Town Hall Seattle.
Thank you.